I got a chance to see Osgood Perkins' brand new film, The Monkey, about a week early. Here is my non-spoiler review for the film. We're going to go into the positives, the negatives, and then give it a rating out of 10. So going into this, I knew very little about it. All I knew is that it was based on a short story by Stephen King about a cymbal monkey where every time it clashes its drumsticks to the drum, somebody dies. That's all I really knew, and that concept alone sounded pretty interesting. I was like, okay, this is probably going to be sort of like Final Destination, where there's going to be a lot of intricate, crazy death sequences that happen to a variety of characters. And that's kind of what we got, but I will say the tone of the movie was 100% not what I was expecting. And I guess we could start with the positives with this. The comedy was actually really solid. Now, that is important to note though, because this is not a horror movie with comedy. This is a comedy with horror. That is the best way to put it, because I was expecting any sort of comedy from this movie to be more so like unintentional humor, or maybe a little bit of campiness here and there, kind of like some of M. Night Shyamalan's movies that have that little bit of campiness to it, or even some of James Wan's movies. I know James Wan was a producer on this, something like Malignant, where there's definitely some humor to it, but it's more so in the campiness. That's not what this movie's like though. This movie isn't just campy or unintentionally funny like Final Destination. No, this is a full-on comedy. This is like balls to the walls comedic. Sometimes they go so far with the comedy, it feels like you're watching one of those scary movie parody movies. Like, that's the best way to put it. I think that's actually an important expectation to have going into it. But the important thing is the comedy did work 90% of the time. There was some really funny moments. My theater was dying of laughter almost every single scene, especially in the beginning. The first like 30 to 40 minutes of this movie was easily the funniest. Once you get past that, definitely kind of drops off a little bit in the humor department, but there was a lot of moments that were genuinely really funny. But I think it's important to go into it knowing that, because if you're going into it thinking it's going to be a fully serious horror movie, like, you're just going to be so whiplashed by that, and it might actually negatively impact the movie for you, to be honest. So I think it's better to just know, let the movies take you with it. Like, it's gonna make you laugh, and that's supposed to, but some of it's like really dark humor, but it's still good. And in general, those first 30 to 40 minutes is definitely my favorite part of the movie. If that part of the movie was the quality and consistency of the rest of the movie, I would be giving this a much higher rating than what I am going to give it, because that part was so much better. The movie's kind of split up into two sections, I guess, and that first section is the first 30 to 40 minutes. I much prefer that stuff. I thought it was really good. I thought the structure of it was really great. There was this internal monologue of the main character that I thought was really great. The story was pretty simple at that point. It's just cymbal monkey causing people to die, and it's pretty insane to see what happens. And the comedy was definitely rampant at those points. Once you get past that point, I'm not going to go into spoilers, of course, but I do think there's some issues I have with it later on, which we'll talk about that in the negatives. The whole movie's shot incredibly well. It's definitely an amazing looking movie. There's a lot of specific shots that I thought really understood how to set a scene and how to make it look interesting. And there's a lot of clever shots with like using certain messages in the background and certain posters. There's one in particular involving a shotgun in a closet, and I thought it was a pretty interesting and clever usage of a sign, and just stuff like that adds to the humor, which I would say most of it was for humor's sake, but even just for the story itself, I thought it worked. I liked the cast quite a bit. Theo James is the lead here, and he is pretty fantastic in this role. He's actually really good. He's actually really funny as well. He did a lot of good moments with the humor, but in particular, there's two kids in this movie that are actually probably the standout of it. Tatiana Maslany is also in this. She was the actress from She-Hulk. That's what most people know her by, because that was one of the bigger things she was in more recently, and she was really solid in this. Like, a lot of funny moments with her character, especially in the early parts of the movie. And because it's a movie so centered around death, that's like the main theme of it. It's just the inevitability of it, the fact that it can happen to anyone. Sometimes it's random. They do a lot of clever things with that. It kind of reminds me of Final Destination, and the fact that the way these characters die, you never can see it coming. You're always thinking to yourself, okay, what could possibly be the thing that's going to cause this person to get killed? And 9 times out of 10, you were not seeing it coming. It's just like, what the fuck? That's that's definitely not what I thought would be resulting in it. And usually they do something interesting and crazy with it. And like I said, especially in the first half of the movie, I thought some of it was just absolutely insane. But we do have to get into some negatives because there are some things that unfortunately just held this movie back for me. So although I loved the comedy, I thought it was hilarious, some of it was just a bit too much. There was a couple scenes, and this happened more so in the second half of the movie, where I felt like they were just doing too much for the comedy without actually caring as much about the story. Like, I do think the story is good, but I felt like sometimes they didn't care about the story in some scenes, and they would rather just set up a scene to make the audience laugh. Like, there was genuine moments where I was like, okay, this is a good moment for these characters. Oh no, we have to throw in some sort of slapsticky type joke, which the slapstick humor, that's very present in this movie, and it works 9 times out of 10. But if you're having an emotional scene between two characters that are supposed to be characters we're going to care about, I understand this movie's main purpose is to make you laugh. That is clearly its main purpose. But I still think having a good story is important too, and I feel like the comedy undercuts it a little bit too much. And even though this movie is so centered around the humor, I kept feeling like it would have been a better movie if it dialed the humor back, if it let itself be a little bit more serious in some more scenes, because the concept is not like too goofy to be a serious movie. I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, Final Destination and this movie aren't that different in terms of its concept. I mean, I would say they're pretty different with what's causing the death, but the idea of how death happens and the inevitability of it and all that, that is very similar. Final Destination takes it pretty seriously, right? It's just the deaths that happen to be kind of just so extravagant and crazy that they end up being a little bit unintentionally funny. This movie doesn't treat it like that, though. This movie's so hardcore trying to make you laugh that some scenes just kind of feel a little bit like too much. It's like, all right, we get it. You're trying to make us laugh. And yes, we were laughing for a lot of it, so it worked most of the time. But that like 10 to 20% of time where it didn't work, it really hurts. Because if you're trying to make people laugh and it doesn't work, that's so much worse than just not trying to make them laugh at all. Like, obviously, right? And so if that many moments in the movie, especially towards the latter half of the film, just completely don't make you laugh, and you could tell they're not caring about the story in that scene, they're just trying to make us laugh, then it hurts the scene a lot. This also leads to a lot of things kind of just happening for no reason. Like, there's certain scenes where it's like the only reason they did this is to make the audience laugh. Again, that's all the reason for it. And if there's no purpose behind it, there's no reason for the story, it doesn't really add to any of the characters, it does kind of fall short sometimes. And again, I get it. If it's a comedy, it's just kind of what it's going for. That's okay. But sometimes I think you got to care a little bit about the story too, because there is some moments where the story is serious. It's not like this is a full-on like Austin Powers type movie or like scary movie. Like, it's not fully that. There are some serious moments, but because the humor so far undercuts a lot of that, I do feel like if it was dialed back at least a little bit, it would have still been very funny. I still would have came out of this movie thinking the movie's hilarious, but I also would have came out of it feeling like it's also just a really solid horror movie at the same time. And my last negative is also related to the story. I do feel like there is a pretty significant piece of the narrative towards the end of the movie involving the main character's brother, and I just didn't love it, to be honest. I didn't love what they were going for. I didn't love the concept behind it, and I thought some of it undercut the horror a little bit. Like, I wish the actual horror involving this monkey, the symbol monkey, was more present in the latter half of the movie. It felt more of a piece to the story in the beginning, maybe like the second act as well, but that third act didn't even feel the horror anymore. It felt like it was gone, and it was just all this specific story on the specific character that felt like it was just so far in the direction of being cheesy. It was funny in some moments, sure, but it almost felt like you could have made this work better as just being exclusively about this simple monkey and the crazy carnage it can cause, and just focusing on that, making it funny with that, but just focusing on that. And if you want to have these other characters, these other motivations, and other stories, throw that in there, sure, but making that like completely undercut the horror is where I started to kind of have an issue with it. In general, I thought this movie was a great time. It's hilarious. It's definitely worth watching, but a couple of those issues definitely held it back for me quite a bit. So I'm gonna have to give this movie a 7.4 out of 10. But I definitely recommend you go see it. This is definitely a recommendation from me. It's definitely not my favorite Osgood Perkins movie. I preferred Long Legs last year. I thought that was a better movie. but this one is definitely a solid horror film. Just think it could have been a lot better. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I will see you on my next one. Peace out.